Good morning and welcome to the scheme meetings of Zipmex Asia Pte Limited and Zipmex Pte Limited. My name is David Kim from KordaMentha and I'll be the chairman of the scheme meetings. Together with Cameron Duncan, we are the appointed scheme managers of both companies. I am joined today by Marcus Lim, CEO of the Zipmex Group, and Jonathan Tang from Herbert Smith Freehills, the appointed legal advisor to the Zipmex companies. Thank you everyone for joining the scheme meetings. I will proceed with the scheme meetings and declare it open at 10 a.m. Singapore time. Before we get into the details of the scheme, I would like to run through some housekeeping matters. Due to the large number of creditors present, this scheme meeting is being held in a live webinar format, and therefore we are unable to have creditors speak or present their opinions live during the scheme meeting. Instead, as directed by the court, we have enabled comments to be posted during the scheme meeting via the Q&A function. If you have any questions you would like to bring to the attention of the scheme managers, please submit your questions via this Q&A function. Some attendees who are using the Chrome browser or mobile may need to toggle their pop-ups and enable cookies so that the Q&A function is enabled. We have shown how to do this on this slide being shown now on the screen. Essentially, please toggle the eye icon and allow third-party cookies to be enabled, and then the Q&A function should be automatically enabled for your use. If for any reason you still cannot send through a Q&A or use the chat function, our email address, zipmex-creditors@kordamenta.com, is being monitored throughout this meeting, so you may wish to send us the questions directly by email and we will pick it up from there. Due to the time constraints during the scheme meeting itself, any unanswered questions received via the Q&A function or new questions submitted to the scheme managers by email will be compiled and the answers will be disseminated to all creditors every 3 days during the 2-week voting period until the 9th day following the scheme meeting. The full Q&A list will also be distributed to all creditors. Lastly, the recording of the scheme meeting and the Thai translation of the scheme meeting transcript will be made available on the Zipmex website shortly after this meeting. So for the benefit of all creditors, I would like to run through the timeline of events since the Zipmex Group was placed under moratorium on 22nd of July 2022. Various entities under the Zipmex Group, namely Zipmex Asia Pte Limited, Zipmex Pte Limited, and Zipmex Australia Pty Limited, proposed a pre-packaged scheme of arrangement, which I'll refer to as the previous scheme, to all creditors in February 2023. The previous scheme was conditional upon the completion of the investment by the investor under the share subscription agreement, which I'll shorten to SSA. However, the transaction was not completed. Despite its best efforts, the Zipmex Group was unable to secure alternative providers to adopt the investor's obligation under the SSA, and in this regard, the previous scheme was incapable of being completed, and accordingly, the previous scheme was terminated in April 2023. In furtherance of a managed wind down of Zipmex Asia Pte Limited and Zipmex Pte Limited's operations, and to obtain a better realization for the creditors than in an immediate liquidation, both Zipmex companies worked on proposing a new scheme across the months from June to September 2023. On 29th September 2023, both companies received leave of the court to proceed with the new scheme, and the relevant scheme documents were subsequently issued to all creditors on 4 October 2023. Creditors were given the opportunity to submit electronic proofs of debt within the cutoff date set on 18 October 2023, but the scheme managers do wish to reiterate that all customer creditors were not required to submit a proof of debt, and that all customer creditors should have received a notification from the scheme managers setting out their approved claim. Formal adjudication of all creditor claims for voting purposes was issued on the 25th of October 2023. In relation to the creditors of the companies, there are two classes of creditors under Zipmex Asia Pte Limited and one class of creditor under Zipmex Pte Limited. For administrative ease, the companies have obtained court consent to dispense with the proof of debt submissions for customer creditors. Therefore, customer creditors were not required to submit a proof of debt form to the scheme managers. All other creditors, namely the secured creditor under Zipmex Asia Pte Limited and vendor creditors under both companies, were required to submit proof of debt to the scheme managers. As previously indicated in this presentation, I confirm that I have received proof of debts from the secured creditor and all vendor creditors and have adjudicated on all proof of debt forms. Before a scheme can become effective and binding on the company and its creditors, the scheme must be approved by a majority in number, representing 3/4 in value of each class of creditors, casting their votes at a meeting of the company's creditors to be separately convened. As you can see from this slide, the relevant classes of each company are outlined in the table. There is one secured creditor with a debt value of USD 4.6 million and 7 vendor creditors or unsecured creditors with total debt value of USD 622.5K under Zipmex Asia Pte Limited. For Zipmex Pte Limited, there is one vendor creditor with debt value of USD $37,221 and 83,298 customer creditors with USD 98.19 million total debt value. The customer and vendor creditors will be classed in one unsecured creditor class. For the purposes of determining whether the statutory majority in value of the creditors who have voted have been achieved, the scheme managers will take into account the total number of valid votes received as the number of creditors, quote unquote, present and voting at the scheme meeting. However, in this situation, there will be a 2-week voting period, which I'll present to the creditors later during this meeting. The scheme managers have also consolidated new proof of debt submissions along with proof of debt submissions adjudicated during the adjudication process in the previous scheme, which was carried out as part of the vote solicitation exercise in February and March 2023. As I mentioned earlier, the scheme managers have delivered to each creditor a written notification setting out their approved claims for voting purposes on 25 October 2023. If you have not yet received or been contacted by us to confirm your holdings in the Z wallet and wish to know your approved claims, please email us at zipmex-creditors@quartermentha.com and we will respond to you directly. I will now run through the key terms of the new scheme. So under the new scheme, creditors of both companies will receive the full benefit of the realizations of Zipmex Asia Pte Limited and Zipmex Pte Limited's assets. The unsecured creditors will be pooled and will share collectively from any recoveries from the realization of assets. As such, the schemes collectively contemplate distributions in 2 tranches to all creditors. No unsecured creditor of either company will receive a more favorable distribution than any other creditor under the terms of the new scheme. The first tranche of distributions is envisioned to be distributed to all unsecured creditors within 120 days of the scheme effective date, a date which will be fixed at a later time, such that each unsecured creditor will receive up to 3.35% return on their approved claim. The distribution will be funded by recoveries on immediately recoverable assets of the companies. The second tranche of distribution is subject to recoveries on delayed realizable assets of the companies. Further details of these assets will be discussed in the following slides. Under the new scheme, creditors shall accept payments and benefits in full satisfaction and complete discharge of all claims against the companies. The anticipated recovery to creditors in the new scheme of up to 3.35% is a better outcome than the expected liquidation scenario in a winding down of 1.64%. The Zipmex Group, along with their advisors, are working diligently to ensure that the value of the remaining assets can be maximized for the benefit of all creditors. Further particulars on the liquidation scenario comparison can be found in the scheme documents that were sent to all creditors on the 4th of October 2023. In terms of tranche one, I'll now break down the realizable assets available for distribution. So the first tranche of distribution will be funded by recoveries from immediately realizable assets. And these include Zipmex Asia's shares in Zipmex Indonesia and Zipmex Thailand, crypto assets held by Zipmex Asia, cash assets held in Zipmex Asia's bank account, realizable proceeds from sale of tangible assets such as laptops and or mobile phones, and Zipmex Asia's claim against Celsius Network of approximately $5 million. The sale of Zipmex Indonesia is progressing well. By way of a letter that was sent to all creditors on 21 November 2023, the Zipmex team has provided an update on the sale progress of both Zipmex Indonesia and Zipmex Thailand. I do wish to highlight that there have been some personal changes in Thailand, and there were certain delays with getting the transaction completed for Thailand. However, notwithstanding this, the Zipmex team is working effortlessly to resolve the outstanding issues, and further updates will be periodically provided to the creditors on this. In terms of the claim against Celsius Network, the Zipmex team are still in active discussions with potential distressed debt funds about the possible acquisition of the claim. As these discussions are ongoing, we cannot divulge further information at this stage. However, in parallel, the Zipmex team is closely monitoring the ongoing bankruptcy proceedings to see what the potential returns may be on this claim through a bankruptcy process. Upon recovery of the above assets, in order to save on transaction fees, proceeds will be pooled and converted to USDC for distribution to all creditors on a pari passu basis to an electronic wallet address designated by the creditor. At a later stage, the scheme managers will be writing again to each creditor seeking confirmation of their wallet addresses. As I mentioned earlier, unsecured creditors will receive up to 3.35% return on the approved claim, and the final distribution return will be fixed and announced to all creditors after the sanction of the new scheme. Should the creditors wish to receive proceeds via fiat, the creditors shall be liable for any administrative fees and expenses incurred in connection with such transfer, and these expenses will be deducted from the sum payable to the creditor under the new scheme. The second tranche of distribution is subject to recoveries on delayed realizable assets. These assets have a longer runway for recovery and are dependent on the progress of various legal proceedings. The delayed realizable assets are Zipmex Asia's claim against Babel Finance Group in its ongoing restructuring proceedings, Zipmex Asia's claim against the investor for specific performance of the SSA and/or damages in the alternative, and recoverability of intercompany loans. As Babel's restructuring and the proceedings against the investor are ongoing, it is difficult at this stage to determine the exact quantum that may be recovered and the likely timing that the distributions can be made. However, we have made some previous estimates that a further distribution could be in the range of 14.24% to 29.35%. In the same letter that I mentioned earlier, sent on 21 November 2023, the Zipmex team provided an update on the Babel restructuring that a Babel creditor had appealed the court's decision to grant leave to convene its scheme meeting. It is therefore likely to lead to delays in the recoveries. Unfortunately, this is outside of Zipmex's control, and the Zipmex team and the lawyers continue to monitor the situation. Similar to the Celsius situation, Zipmex is also in discussions with potential distressed debt funds that may be interested in purchasing the Babel debt from Zipmex. The discussions are far more preliminary at this stage, and if and when there are any material updates, the creditors will be informed. Creditors will continue to be updated periodically on the progress of the above in any case. When it is possible for a further distribution, this will largely follow a similar process as Tranche 1, whereby the assets will be pooled into a consolidated fund for distribution to all creditors on a pari passu basis, with distributions to be made to the nominated wallet addresses in USDC. I will allow Marcus Lim, CEO of the Zipmex Group, to address the creditors later during the scheme meeting and provide any other updates in regards to the assets and the process. After the sanction of the scheme managers will write to all creditors with details on the Tranche 1 distribution and request for creditors' electronic wallet addresses to receive their distribution in USDC. Creditors will then be given a month to submit their addresses, whilst the scheme managers will work with Zipmex to finalize the asset realization process and calculate each creditor's entitlement under the distribution. This will be calculated on a pari passu basis. Once the above is finalized, creditors will be notified of their entitlement and the intended date of distribution will be announced. On the intended date of distribution, the scheme managers, together with Zipmex, will facilitate the distribution to creditors' electronic wallet addresses, and upon completion, creditors will be notified accordingly. For Tranche 2 distributions, a similar process will be undertaken, save that creditors will not need to resubmit their wallet addresses again. As I mentioned earlier, should creditors wish to receive distributions in fiat, any fees or expenses incurred with such transfer shall be borne by the creditor and will be deducted from any sum payable to the creditor under the scheme. Further, if for any reason whatsoever, any payment made to the creditor pursuant to this scheme is not received by that creditor, and such non-receipt of payment is not the result of any fault on the part of the Zipmex Group, such creditor shall be deemed to have waived all its rights in relation to that payment upon the expiry of 2 months from the date of such payment being made. For customer creditors, I'll also explain how a customer creditor's approved claim will be determined. So due to operational concerns surrounding the locking up of ZMT, for the purposes of ascertaining customer creditors' Z-Wallet balances, the scheme managers have fixed the pricing as at 27 July 2023. As far as we are aware and are concerned, there should be no fluctuations and differences in customer creditors' BTC, Ethereum, USDC, and USDT balances from the date of moratorium being 22nd of July 2022 to this date. So assuming a customer creditor has the following balances in his Z wallet: 0.25 BTC, 1.2 Ethereum, 200 USDC, and 0 USDT. The total value of the customer's approved claim is estimated to be USD $9,785.33. Applying the rate of return of 3.35%, the customer creditor can expect to receive up to USDC equivalent of $327.81 in the first tranche distribution. With regards to all other cryptocurrencies apart from the above, I've been informed that all balances, including ZMT and gold, are being automatically transferred to customers' trade wallets, with the bulk already transferred as of today. There may be some small amounts of transfers that are still to be finalized over the course of today and tomorrow, but I've been advised that trade wallet balances can then be withdrawn to an external wallet of customer's choice. Given that the above transfer was only performed after the notice of adjudication, the scheme managers will take into account Z wallet balances for BTC, Ethereum, USDC, USDT, ZMT, and gold as at 27 July 2023 for the purposes of determining if the statutory majority has been obtained in terms of voting on the new scheme. However, post the sanction of the new scheme, only the actual BTC Ethereum, USDC, and USDT balances in Z Wallet will be considered in determining customers' approved claim for the purposes of distribution, as all other cryptocurrency balances would have been transferred to customers' trade wallets for full withdrawal to an external wallet. I'll move on to the voting instructions. So whilst traditionally the voting on the scheme would take place at the scheme meetings, given the large number of creditors of the companies, following this meeting, there will be a 2-week voting period for creditors to indicate their vote on the new scheme. Customer creditors will be given the opportunity to vote on the new scheme via an electronic form as displayed on the screen. The link to the electronic form will be disseminated to all creditors after this meeting. There are 2 key fields in this form. Customer creditors are only required to key in your email address registered with Zipmex and indicate your vote for, against, or abstain on the new scheme. The cutoff for voting would be 4 p.m. Singapore time on 6 December 2023. Similarly, for the secure creditor and the vendor creditors, creditors may indicate their vote via this electronic voting form. The electronic voting form for secured and vendor creditors is slightly different. As you can see, there are additional fields to be completed, such as the relevant Zipmex entity where you are a creditor, the creditor's name, and proxy details. As a reminder, all secured and vendor creditors are required to submit a proxy form to the scheme managers at zipmex-creditors@quartermentor.com prior to voting. If such form is not submitted before voting, creditors are given the opportunity to upload the signed proxy form via the electronic voting form as well. As mentioned before, similarly, the voting cutoff time will be 4 p.m. Singapore time on 6 December 2023. All creditors are encouraged to indicate their vote on the scheme as soon as possible after receiving the electronic voting form. However, should creditors wish to submit a physical hard copy voting form, please complete that and scan the voting form attached in the scheme document issued on 4th of October 2023 and return that to us by email or hard copy to the scheme manager's address. To close off the formalities of the scheme meeting, there are various key dates moving forward which I wish to bring to the attention of all creditors. The 2-week voting period will commence immediately after this meeting up to 4 p.m. Singapore time on 6 December 2023. Once the voting period expires, the scheme managers will tabulate the votes received, and should the statutory majority be obtained on the scheme, the companies will make an application to the court for approval of the scheme. The intended date for such application is currently set on 13 December 2023, with the projected hearing date on or around 27 December 2023. The current moratoria granted will expire on 8 January 2024. Subject to the above, the companies may apply for a further extension of the moratoria to facilitate the distribution under the new scheme, with the Tranche 1 distribution projected to happen by end April 2024. I will now like to pass this time to Marcus, who will provide a short address to all the creditors present. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Good to reconnect with all of you here again today on this meeting. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this meeting today. I mean, we've been in this process for the last 18 months now, since July 2022. And the first opportunity that we had was to completely recover all losses due to Babel and Celsius. But unfortunately, the investor that was coming in had pulled out back in March of 2020, or March of 2023. We had subsequently spoken to a number of investors, and we've reached out to our shareholder base as well to make kind of any introductions, be it whether it's in Singapore, in Thailand, or regionally in Southeast Asia. And we have met with limited success, and we have also taken the approach that have been advised by us in terms of how we can maximize creditor return. So unfortunately, we're not able to go with the first option, which was to make 100% recovery, which is what we hoped for. But unfortunately, that deal did not happen back in March of 2023. So for this scheme, we encourage your support, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Marcus. So the formalities of the meeting have been completed, but what we intend to do is to run through some of the questions and answers that have been received prior to the meeting. And then after that, we'll try and answer some of the questions that have been received via the Q&A and chat function. So what we'll do is let's start with the question and answer time from the questions that we received prior to the meeting. So the first question here is that creditors are expected to receive up to 3.35% return on the approved claim amount. How and when will the final distribution return percentage be finalized? So the answer to this question is the return will be finalized on the scheme effective date based on the scheme company's ability to effect recovery of the assets as part of tranche one. So we have made note that we hope to have that in place by end April 2024. The second question was, how would any proceeds be returned back to the creditor? So as I mentioned earlier, the initial return is targeted to be in USDC for customers of Zipmex Group, and this is expected to be within 120 days of the approval of the scheme of arrangement. A second return may only materialize in 2 to 3 years' time. The reason for USDC is to save on the transaction costs because essentially, if it was to be done in a fiat, for example, then the transaction costs are likely to outweigh any benefit that creditors will receive. Number 3, would it be via the Zipmex exchange platform, or would a fiat dollar amount be sent via check bank transfer? So as I mentioned earlier, the initial return may not be via the Zipmex exchange platform. This is because once Zipmex Thailand and Indonesia is sold to a purchaser, the Zipmex Group may no longer have operational control over such disbursement of the cryptocurrency through its platform. Instead, customers of the companies will be prompted to indicate a wallet address for the return in USDC. So is there an indicative timeline on the recovery of delayed realizable assets and tranche 2 distribution? So as I mentioned earlier, we believe that it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years, but it really depends on the outcome of the Babel restructuring and also the potential actions against the investor. So unfortunately, at this point, we will have to keep it broad, but as and when further updates are available, we can let you know. So what are the cryptocurrencies covered under the scheme? I have balances in my trade wallet. Are these balances included under the scheme of arrangement? So the cryptocurrencies covered under the scheme in terms of a distribution will be BTC, Ethereum, USDC, and USDT. All altcoins and the amounts in ZMT and gold, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, have been automatically transferred to your trade wallet, and all trade wallet balances are available for withdrawal and are therefore not part of the scheme. So what will happen to Zipmex Indonesia, Zipmex Thailand, and Zipmex Australia? What can creditors expect, and how will they be notified? So we've talked in depth about how there are ongoing negotiations for the sale of Zipmex Thailand and Zipmex Indonesia. Zipmex Australia, unfortunately, will likely be placed into liquidation shortly. What is the cryptocurrency price calculated to derive customer creditors' approved claim amounts? So for the purposes of the calculations for voting purposes, we have used the date as at 27 July 2023 in terms of calculating the prices of the cryptocurrencies. There are two schemes. Must both pass for me to obtain recovery? Yes. So both schemes are interconditional. If one fails, then both schemes will fail. Why has this process taken so long? So the initial plan in the prepackaged scheme of arrangement, which was sanctioned and remains in effect today, was for the investor to inject liquidity to make full repayment to all affected creditors. For various reasons, this did not materialize, and then proceedings have now been commenced by Zipmex Asia against the investor for breach of the investment agreement. Therefore, there has been a delay in the overall process and the need for this new scheme that's being proposed to you today. What happens to the loan VVI extended to Zipmex Asia? So the loan is secured by charges over Zipmex Asia's shares in Zipmex Thailand and Zipmex Indonesia. Negotiations to sell these shares are ongoing. VVI is a secured creditor and will receive first cut of these sale proceeds. So what is the plan for the Zipmex platform? The proposed scheme is a managed wind down. So that means that following the passing of the scheme, Zipmex Asia will no longer run the platforms. Zipmex Thailand and Zipmex Indonesia will be passed to new owners. Zipmex Singapore and Zipmex Australia's operations will slowly cease in accordance with local regulations. What will happen if the schemes fail? If the schemes fail, it is likely that the next step will be liquidation. In such a case, the projection is that the recovery will be very low or close to zero. The main assets of Zipmex Asia, the shares in Zipmex Thailand and Indonesia, will likely have very low value as the licenses may be rescinded. How do you recommend I vote? So the scheme companies believe that voting in the scheme will be in the creditor's best interests. We can't obviously tell you how to vote, but creditors are encouraged to seek independent legal advice to safeguard their rights if in doubt. Could you explain how Zipmex intends to sell claims in Celsius or other assets to maximize recoveries to creditors? So the Zipmex team is in active discussions with potential distressed debt funds that may be interested in buying Zipmex's claim in Celsius. The decision whether to sell their claim now versus waiting to see what the return is from the Celsius bankruptcy proceedings will be a commercial decision that is made in consultation with Zipmex's lawyers and their financial advisors. It is in the best interest of Zipmex to maximize the amount that can be recovered, as these proceeds will be used to pay the creditors of Zipmex. Is there a creditor representative who can monitor or voice out inappropriate actions taken by Zipmex with regards to asset recoveries? Okay. So we had previously informed creditors that it was the belief that a creditor committee was not recommended given the large number of individual creditors across different markets, and that there were maybe potentially additional associated costs with forming multiple creditor committees, as they will need independent legal and financial advisor advice and assistance, which may need to be covered by the Zipmex group. Instead, the intention is that creditors will be notified promptly of any significant developments in terms of asset recoveries. Should any creditor have any objections, these can be raised to scheme managers and/or Zipmex at the appropriate time. In the event assets are sold to staff, shareholders, or any other person who has direct, indirect relationship with Zipmex, what are some steps taken to prevent conflict of interest? At the moment, there is currently no intention to sell the high value assets to any related parties. What are the terms agreed with the legal advisor and scheme managers? Are these terms aligned with the interest of creditors such that it does not involve a prolonged situation where such professional fees will constitute a bulk of the recovery of delayed realizable assets? So the fees of the scheme managers have been agreed. The company has engaged in fee mandates with each of its legal advisors in various jurisdictions. The interests of the companies and creditors are aligned to the fees being paid. Therefore, it's in everyone's interest to conduct and finalize the scheme in the shortest possible time. The professional fees agreed with both parties do not constitute a scheme debt and that will therefore not affect the projected return of up to 3.35% to creditors in the first tranche of distribution. Why are the creditors not updated on the Babel situation, given that this is a key asset to be recovered? Can creditors request for access to attend hearings pertaining to the Babel restructuring process, given that we are indirect stakeholders in this claim? So creditors, unfortunately, are unable to access hearings pertaining to the Babel restructuring process as they are not a direct creditor of Babel. So updates on the Babel situation will be provided to creditors from time to time. The scheme managers on behalf of Zipmex circulated an email yesterday, which provided an update on the Babel recovery, and I mentioned that earlier in the meeting as well. Why are creditors being repaid back in only USDC? Is there a chance creditors can be repaid in the respective cryptocurrencies owed in phase 2? So distribution will be made to creditors in USDC by default. Should creditors wish to receive their distributions in an alternative currency, it may be possible, provided that the fees and expenses incurred in connection with such transfer, if any, shall be borne by the creditors and will be deducted from any sum payable to the creditors under this scheme. Is there a chance recovery will reach or exceed 100 cents or 100%? What will happen to creditors' claims in that situation? It is highly unlikely that there will be 100% recovery to creditors. Upon sanction of the scheme, creditors agree and accept that payment of distributions by Zipmex shall be in full satisfaction and complete discharge and extinguishment of all claims against Zipmex. So this is the 20 questions that we received pre the meeting. Just bear with me one moment as I try and look through the questions that we have received. And I'll try and answer some of these now. But as I mentioned earlier, if there are questions in the Q&A function that aren't answered, these will be circulated with answers to all the creditors every 3 days, up to the 9th day. So I think there's some questions around why we don't have a Thai interpreter to translate the meeting alongside me in English. From our perspective, what we intend to do, well, number one, in respect to the slides that are presented, the Thai translations have been presented. So you should be able to see that on the slides. Secondly, after this meeting, we are going to be providing all the creditors with a Thai transcript of what I have delivered in this meeting that you are able to review after this meeting. So I think one of the questions is why Indonesia got claim 100%, but Thai get 3.35%. Is that fair? So at the end of the day, from Indonesia's perspective, the intention is that the Indonesian subsidiary will be sold. The Zipmex PTE limited creditors, so it's not necessarily the Thai creditors, but it's the creditors with Z Wallet products under Zipmex PTE Limited. Those are the creditors that will be getting the returns through the scheme of arrangement. So it's not necessarily that Indonesia gets 100% back and Thai gets 3.35% back. The Thai creditors who are creditors of Zipmex PTE Limited will be getting up to 3.35% first, and then any future distribution from that. There's another question similarly, depositing money in Thailand, but why do I have to appear in a Singapore court? Again, the Z Wallet product was with under Zipmex PT Limited. So the customer creditor relationship is with Zipmex PT Limited in Singapore. Got another question here which says, what happened to the unclaimed funds of 96.xx% that the creditors didn't get back? As creditors, I think it's a very unfair situation from Zipmex Quadramenta for us to be victims of such elaborated scam without us knowing whereabouts of our funds. As I said earlier, the intention was that in the first, I guess, pre-pack scheme, the investor was going to make all the customers whole. Unfortunately, the investment has not gone through, and the remaining assets of Zipmex Asia and Zipmex PT Limited are being pulled together in a managed wind down to try and give back as much possible to the creditors of those companies. So that, yeah, again, so there's questions about how to vote on against the scheme. So again, after this meeting, the link to the electronic form will be circulated to the creditors, and you'll be then given the 2-week window up to 4 p.m. Singapore time on the 6th of December 2023 to vote for, against, or abstain on the scheme that's being proposed. I think there's one of the points about how we deal with the comments. So as we as I've mentioned earlier at the beginning of this meeting, all the comments that have been put in the Q&A function, every single comment will be provided to all the creditors. And to the extent that there are questions that need answering, then we will supply the answer to that. So we are not deleting comments or anything like that. The full list of all the comments will be provided to all the creditors, so everyone will see exactly what the comments were. There's a question that says, the document sent suggests that there is circa 3 million available for creditors from the sale of Thailand and Indonesia license, but the follow-up email says that there is a super priority claim, so none of those proceeds will actually get to us. This is correct, right? So the answer is no. If the transactions for Thailand and Indonesia complete, there would be circa surplus after paying the super priority loan amount. So at the stage, we're still working on ensuring that that surplus does come back for the unsecured creditors. I think one of the points was we should be able to get the Singapore creditors together. Can we do face-to-face meeting? So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there are circa 80,000 or so of creditors. So it was just physically not possible to do a face-to-face meeting because we would not be able to find a space that could physically hold so many people. And that additional cost would essentially be amounts that would be incurred that reduces the amount to the creditors. So that is the reason why this is being done in a online format and there's no face-to-face meeting. So one of the other questions is, what is happening with assets in the trade wallet which are not supported for transfer, such as DOT? So our understanding is that once the cryptocurrencies are in your trade wallet, they are currently freely available for withdrawal. So I would leave that. If you have any more specific questions about that, please reach out to the Zipmex tech team. What will be the consequence if majority voting no? The scheme will fail, the companies will likely go into liquidation, and then it's probably likely that there'll be even less chance of recoveries. And it could very much be that there'll be zero recoveries on all the claims. I think that I've tried to just try and answer as many of these questions as I can. What we'll do is we will review the full Q&A list, and to the extent that we haven't provided answers to some of these questions, then they will be done so in English and Thai, and then circulated to the creditors. From our purposes, I mentioned earlier that the requirement is that we circulate, and we'll circulate this by email every 3 days for the first 9 days. So there'll be at least 3 emails sent in the next 9-day period, whereby we will collate any questions that we receive, not only through this Q&A function, but also any emails that you send through to us with any questions. We will provide the answers by email to all the creditors, and that would be as directed by the court, sent around via email. I think I'd like to leave it there for today. Thanks to everyone who have made the time to attend the scheme meeting. The next email that you will be receiving today is the link to the electronic voting form. And then shortly thereafter, there'll be a number of emails coming out. One would be a copy of these slides, a recording link to this meeting, the Thai translation of the transcript, being what was discussed today, and then every 3 days thereafter, the question and answers and other questions that we received by email. So I would like to close the meeting here and thank everyone for their attendance. Goodbye.